Hi. Well, welcome to another edition of Coffee with the Curator. We are here today to support our show Mythos that is opened on February 15th and it'll go to April 14th. I have three of the artists in the show here. I'll introduce them a little more thoroughly in a minute, but we have Barbara Ludwig, Joe Pomarico, and Maria Spector. Two other artists weren't able to attend. So they are William Randazzo and Madeline Daversa. Okay, so before I begin, two little pieces of business. One, we have a land use statement we like to read before every event. Okay, the Patchogue Arts Council at 20 Cherry Street, Patchogue, New York, is part of the traditional territory of the Unkachuk Nation. Whose car was that? It's like, is that my car? Did I just hit my keys? We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between Unkachuk people and their ancestral territories. We recognize the deep cultural and artistic contributions of the indigenous peoples, past and present, who have shaped and continue to influence this land. We honor and respect the many diverse indigenous peoples still connected to this land on which we gather, create, and celebrate the arts. You know, that's an interesting statement. It's going to play into the conversation today. And one other thing I'd like to mention that also in support of the show, we have another series called Learning to Look. In Learning to Look, it's more of a lecture-based, and I present various topics. The topic will be myth in art. And the date for that is March 27th. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce the artist. We have Barbara Ludwig, is a contemporary visual artist born in Brooklyn, living on Long Island. She received her bachelor's degree in studio art from Stony Brook University. I was there with her. Ludwig worked for many years as a cartoonist and illustrator in her studio at a historical site in Smithtown. She injured her right hand closing a window in the 1740 section of the building. To regain dexterity, she began sculpting reliefs based on old Polaroid photographs, which she ultimately cast and poured in bronze. Her most easily viewed public sculpture is the Korean War Monument located outside the Soldiers and Sailors Museum on East Main Street in Huntington, New York. Her recent dollhouse photographs incorporate her love of history and sculpture. They have been shown at exhibitions in the Photo Gallery in Huntington, Firefly Artist Gallery in Northport, Mills Pond House in St. James, the Edward Hopper Museum in Nyack, and the 2024 Long Island Biennial at the Heckscher Museum of Art in Huntington. Barbara Ludwig.
Hi, everybody. How are you going? Thank you.
Joe Pomarico is a filmmaker born and raised in West Babylon. The first time he held a paintbrush was when his grandfather handed him one at 7 years old. He taught Joe how to paint oil landscapes until his passing when Joe was 16. A year before his grandfather died, he gave Joe his watch. The very night, time, and moment he passed, the watch stopped working. As a tribute to his grandfather, Joe made a narrative film inspired by their true story. The short film is called Gus. All those years after Gus bred him to understand composition, depth, and perspective, all those years together, Gus bred him to understand composition, depth, and perspective. Joe applied those skills into filmmaking. All of his artwork is inspired by a visual image. Then that visual is translated into a painting. Then that image is translated into a story, eventually becoming a motion picture. Joe Pomarico. Maria Spector's education includes an MFA in painting from Queens College and EDM in consulting psychology from Harvard and a BA in art and psychology from Binghamton University. She has received individual artist support grants from the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs and the New York State Council on the Arts. She has exhibited in museums, galleries, and universities as far as Anchorage Museum and Purdue University, and throughout the metro area, including the Islip Art Museum, Howland Center in Beacon, New York. Recent exhibitions include Girlhood at the Every Woman Biennial at La Mama. I don't think I said that right. You'll correct me on that. Joseph's College Gallery and Women Celebrating Women at El Barrio Art Space. And the Body Politic at the Heckscher Museum of Art in Huntington, the Long Island Biennial. So this show, thank you. This show is actually conceived at the Long Island Biennial when I saw the works of these two talented artists, right? And then it was, let's try to flesh out the show. So why don't we begin by having each of you just describe, don't go too deep because we're gonna get a chance to talk more, right? Just describe what it is you do with your work. I think I have a card for each of you. I'm gonna flash it in for the Zoom land over here. Joe, you wanna start it?
Yes, sir.
So what's it? What is it I do
Yeah, what did you do with your painting?
with my painting?
Yeah, and you can
well,
tell us a little about filmmaking too.
Yeah, I mean, I guess
Okay.
where it all begins,
Right.
how I get started with my work is, really, what gets me inspired is I started listening to classical music. Been listening to classical music since I was 12 years old. I was always into it, which started me to write stories. Sometimes when I'm in this place where I feel I can't tell a story on a screen, I always implement my, paintbrush to a visual of that image or that thing I see that just from listening to music. So that's kind of like my process, my bio with my grandfather. He taught me how to paint. He was it was a hobby of his to paint oil landscapes. And over the years, I think I just matured over the years of different styles of painting. But really, it's hard for me to explain like what how I come up with.
We'll get more out of you.
Yeah, get more out of it.
So for those who are seeing the show for the first time, or maybe for those in our Zoom audience, Joe's images all come from what looks like Westerns, the Great American Western film. But that's not the only work that he's done. He's done images from other genres of films as well, too. But for this show, I felt like keeping it in the connected concept of the Western.
Yeah.
Right? Barbara?
I'm up next.
Yeah.
My process, what I usually do is think about it, say a childhood memory, and I start with doing a cartoon, and then I try to imagine how I would illustrate that cartoon utilizing the Max Tyndall house and the vintage Keiko dolls. And I start gathering all the parts. Sometimes I'll put out a message to friends and I'll say, I'm looking for little paper dolls. One of the pictures has little Dolly Dingle paper dolls that someone sent me from London. So I'll get all the parts together and put in lights, and there's light coming in through the window, and I have a light in front, and I start setting things up in the back, and I set up all the little parts, and I slowly work my way forward, and I take my cell phone and I get ready to take the shot, and stuff in the back falls down. So then I start all over again and set everything up and keep at it until I find a good image. That's the current process of my work.
Okay, thank you. So the question wasn't process. It was description, but that's okay, because so Barbara's work are photographs that she takes of doll houses that she populates with various characters and creates a scene from various, what would you say, life, the life.
Childhood memories.
Yeah, kind of like domestic life, that's the word, domestic life from, you would say, the Wonder Years, the late 50s and 60s,
Right.
right? Okay, and Maria, tell us, now you've had my reprimand, so.
I'm not sure, was it processed?
You can do both, it doesn't matter.
The artists don't like to talk. It's a very tricky thing for many of us.
Sometimes,
Many of us.
others like to go on forever.
So my work, which is behind us, they take a lot of research. I come up with questions in my head that just bother me. Why are we calling the girl a sweet tart? And I roll it over in my head over and over and over again. And I start looking at books, like anybody that's a researcher knows, that's the first place you go to is the library. And I look through pop culture and fine culture and all kinds of, and I try to answer the question. And I realized in time that I don't present art with an answer. I'm always presenting art with a question. And that's why I like to hear a lot about what people interpret when they see my work and see if they've had the same questions and if they've come up with the answer. And then each painting will lead to another painting, which continues a new question or a continuation of some of the same questions. And I really have not come up with any answers in my work, and why we present things the way we do, and why consumer culture is such that we transmit ideas and how we should behave and how we talk and how we treat and how we raise our children. And those are my paintings, and
Okay, so for those in Zoom again and who haven't taken a close look at this, Maria makes their watercolors,
they're gouache.
their gouache paintings, and they all are populated with young people.
Mhm.
And the young people are surrounded by some scenes that look like they come from the game Candyland. Right, that seemed to be like the thing for me that kept me. So there are trees and some natural setting, but instead of having fruit, they're populated with candy, right? And there are some other things going on. In many of them, you find the children or the adolescents. They're at a certain age where they're wearing clothing that is really a famous painting, so you get a meta image going on through that. Why are they wearing, what does that painting have to do with what's going on in here?
The game Candyland is in one of the paintings.
Well, that must have been where I first thought of it from, but
You have to find it though.
the game that one, I'll have to, I can't bed that. Okay, well, I'm not seeing games, I'm seeing candy all over the place. Okay, well, we'll get back to that. I don't know whether I have that image unless it's on here.
John, can I add something?
No.
What's
Can I
that?
add something?
Yeah, sure.
Because now I have a better.
Oh, so you want to contribute?
Well, I just
Okay,
wanna say, like,
now he's got
I
something to
think
say.
I need to like.
You're warming
pick
up.
a little bit. All right, so basically, with my work, with the American West, some of my pieces in the back there, a Native American woman who's called Quiet Before the Storm. What I like to do is evoke emotion. I want anyone who's viewing the work to find a story, any kind of story, interpret it in any way. I want you to feel something. I want it to, when you see it, I want you to feel immersed into that and lose yourself in that period of time. And a lot of people can feel different feelings, emotions, what's going on, questions about it, a Native American woman, it's called Quiet Before the Storm because, here she is, a beauty in this beautiful landscape, but you could tell from just even that storm cloud coming in that danger is on the horizon, something's coming. Doesn't necessarily mean a storm is coming, but what's about to change with their life over time in history. But So that's always been my goal, was to have you look at it and just see a whole picture rather than just a still frame of what I'm painting,
Oh, so it opens up a whole narrative.
the whole narrative.
Yeah, okay, very good. Well, narrative is something that runs through all of your work,
Yeah.
all three of your work, and even the artists that aren't here. Narrative is a part of it. So, narrative is, basically telling a story. And the name of this show was Mythos, right? And the concept of what a myth is, a lot of people have different understandings of what a myth is. Lately, a myth has come to mean an untruth, right? But that's not really where it came from. But the idea of truth is questionable in myth because its function isn't really just to tell a narrative. The function of a myth is to bind a group of people together, right? We share the myth, right? And this is a thing that holds a group of people together. So one of those shared myths is the idea of like, especially I was thinking about the post-war period, the 1950s, the 1960s, you might call it the Wonder Years, you might call it the Eisenhower administration, that particular period of time. And the idea that, well, some people think back now to the greatness of America at that particular period, and they are sugarcoating America or the United States in that period because not everything was great, and it's easy to hide, from yourself the things you don't want to think about, right? That were happening there. So with these artists in the show, one of the things, I don't even know if it first was the reason why I chose these artists, but when they were all assembled in here, I realized that great American myth was being played out through all of their work. And I wonder if each of you could contemplate that. Barbara, we'll start with you because I know we've discussed this and this way the two of you could get a chance to charge up your answer to this. But, the idea that, that it is a myth, right? Would you like to speak about that?
A lot of the time frame that's depicted in my work is a time when America was experimenting with the nuclear family. For the first time, women were marrying younger. If you look back in time, women married considerably older and, excuse me, very often lived in households that included other women, other experienced family members to assist in daily tasks like child rearing. This was the great American experiment where it was just mommy and daddy and the children, and they lived in their home, and it was something to aspire to. But it was not for everybody, I would say.
So that's like, that's like the suburbs, right? That's the story of the suburbs, right? And this is one of those post-war experiences of moving from the cities into having your own, the soldier, the veteran would have his home and his family and his little piece of property, right? So,
well, when women married post-World War II, of course, there was a deficit of marriages during the time of the war, but women were in their 30s, they were in their late 20s, and that was considered pretty much a norm for marriage. The time period I'm depicting with the nuclear family, women were marrying as young as 20. So by 22, 23, the majority of women had married. So they were very young, they were on their own, and it must have been a daunting task.
Well, I know that my older sister was born when my mom was 19. She got married when she was 18. So that, I think 20 is generous when you think about that. They were back in those days, They were marrying right out of high school.
And the young men were not that much older.
No.
So it was quite a bit of responsibility, a mortgage, children, a wife that didn't particularly have an economic stake. You know, certainly she had a domestic stake, but as far as paying the bills, he had needed to shoulder those responsibilities.
So how does that play out in your work?
Well, I can imagine what strikes me most is I am illustrating a memory, and it's a child's memory, and a child's memory is selfish. It doesn't see or think about the price of the mortgage or turning the lights on or any of that
Okay.
stuff. But as I place the figures, I do have a lot of empathy for that. I realize how hard it must be, and sometimes I've had a gallery owner say to me, I love how the expressions change. And really they're dolls. They have the same expression, but if I light them or tilt their head, it kind of changes their expression. And I often place them in a fashion to be empathetic to what struggles they may have been enduring while raising the kids.
Okay, so that's interesting because you know, when I saw them, I felt the innocence, but I didn't realize that innocence was meant to be the perspective, you know, from the child's innocence, right? So I just thought, man, these things have this irony in them because it wasn't all what it looks like in these pictures.
I agree.
Right, okay, good. So innocence, right? How about you?
So I think with myth making and innocence, a lot of what I'm dealing with is the art world sets itself apart. They believe that they're above the idea that they can pass on difficult or dangerous information as well. And so when you see in my paintings is that I'm taking on a lot of the art world. So I have in this painting, we have the tree there that's based on Michelangelo and the snake. And next to those paintings are all on the dresses. These are paintings by men of women. And you have Toulouse-Lautrec having painted a prostitute. And you have Gustav Klimt having painted a pregnant woman there. And then you have Picasso having painted his mistress that I
very young
believe was
mistress.
was a very young mistress. The shorts are Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, which of course we know that they were married. We know Jackson Pollock much more than we know Lee Krasner. And then the candy, of course, have all these sexual names. So I'm saying that the art world has taken part in the same thing that the pop culture world has done. We just give a pass to the art world. We say it's irony. It's irony that maybe we use sort of sexualized information or use sex in art and that sort of thing. But really, they accept it as well and they pass on the information in the same way.
So, you know, you mentioned the candy as having sexualized names. And this is like a chicken and egg. What came first? Were the sexual connotations based on the fact that they were candies with those names already? I mean, this is really rhetorical here, but you know,
Doesn't matter.
doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter, because we use those names, don't
Well,
we?
we do now.
If I call a woman a honey bun,
Right.
you know, that's a sweet honey bun, right?
Mhm.
But does it matter that
There's
we
no
take-
candy named honey
Oh,
bun.
well, you have a Hostess honey bun.
Oh, okay, so we
I
have.
only think of honey bun now because
Okay,
in my new painting. We're
Okay,
all
there's
dealing with honey bun.
the chiclets.
And
Okay,
chiclets.
we.
And if you look at this painting, I'm taking on more contemporary art in this painting. So I'm saying here we have historical paintings. All those artists are dead. Most of the artists that I've taken on in this are alive. So I'm saying that they're doing the same thing. So Jeff Koons is doing the same thing. So, right, and we have John Curran in this work. We also have, you know, Banksy and there's the Candyland game next to him. You can see the Candyland game.
Well, wait a minute.
All the way, next to Banksy, see his shirt?
I
That's
can't see that
that's
from-
the board game. That's the board game from Candyland.
Oh, okay, so it's in there. Yeah.
So it's in there.
Mhm.
But So I think that the myth making is something that I'm trying to say, I don't know if it's a chicken or the egg, and I don't think any of us really know, but the thing that matters is that we carry it on. So it just continues forward and we carry it on, and no one is free of that. We're all doing it.
Right, so when you first look at Maria's work, you know, the first thing that you see is like, oh, all these children in what appears to be like you know, a bright and sunny and happy, you know, all this candy, you know, surrounded by candy, and you know, so you think of it as, you know, a happiness, you know, when you first look at these. And then you get a little bit deeper into them. So when I'm looking at them, it's like the first thing is, oh, there's this, you know, there's this presentation of youth as being so carefree, and now we have to deal with the fact that it's not. On my way here before, they were talking about how after the internet, not when the internet started, but when the internet became product driven and things were getting pushed at people, there was a rise in especially young girls having mental health issues. You know, so
Yeah, and you'll see that too. Like I also have a lot of pop Disney painting, right? So you have the Little Mermaid in there. And what's the story behind the Little Mermaid? She had to give up her legs in order to be with her prince.
yep.
I like talking about basically how people are like over sexualizing in society, right? Like even with movies too, you know, in art, you know, I think that, you know, there's too many unnecessary nudity, over sexualizing of women. Like my work is inspired more about female empowerment, especially in the American Old West, you know, where women weren't as control as men during those times, you know, and like try to control everything. And what I like the fact about my characters is that they're strong women that want to take charge, and you know, they don't need a man to, you know, allow them to achieve whatever it is they want or inspired to be. And you know, that also comes with inspiration with the fact that like in today's society where like everything's overly sexualized, unnecessary, nudity, things like that, where it's just like in all mediums, it's like these filmmakers are trying to make an easy buck, they think, just for, you know, putting this stuff in there. And you know, I think that like, because a lot of my like my wife has inspired me a lot, because you know, I look out for creating, I like to create female characters that, you know, that are just strong, and you know, it's just my train of thought. But you know, it's I don't like, I guess in some ways where you think things have gotten better, but obviously like social media is something that has been really taken us backwards politically as well. But that's kind of always been my thing. It's like I always like the female lead, that is like the main inspiration, my main.
So there must have been a time, and you know, I can't remember what the films would have been,
Yeah.
but there was the standard Western with the male hero, and then at some point there was a movie. Do you know when that happened? When there was a film that had an empowered woman.
The Quick and the Dead.
What's that?
Quick and the
The
Dead.
Quick and the Dead.
Yeah.
That was one that would have been it. And when did
Sharon.
that come out?
Oh yeah, that was Gene Hackman, right? And Sharon Stone. When that in the early in the 90s.
Well,
Yeah.
do you mean there weren't any? There must have been
There-
some earlier than that. You know, so
Think about, that's the thing, when you look back, I mean, as much as I'm huge fan of like spaghetti westerns, you know, Sergio Leone with Claudia Cardinale,
Mhm.
you know, Raquel Welch, you know, but you know, they obviously sexualize these women, you know,
Right.
for, you know, in the films, but yeah, the really, like Sharon Stone really came.
Yeah,
with the
that's
first
Jane
movie.
Fonda.
Oh, Jane Fonda, oh, Jane Fonda.
Did she do anything back then? Oh, well.
Which,
I'm not that much of a film buff, so I don't know, so I'm not gonna keep you to
No,
trying to come up with the answer to that.
No,
But,
no.
you brought it up an observation that I wanted to follow up on with the story that came out yesterday. And it was such a strange thing to read, and there was a list of words and terms that there might have been 100 words. And the New York Times headline said that these words are words that the federal agencies are being discouraged from using. And you look at some and you can understand that some of those words would have been things that would have been flashpoints for the current administration, so they would leave them out. But as I'm looking down the list, I saw the word female. Female is like a word that you shouldn't be using anymore. And then I said, okay, well, maybe they just are talking about, they don't want us to use the words male and female. So I went, there was no male. It was only female that wasn't allowed to be used. It's like, you were talking about that. It reminded me of it. Are we trying to go back to that world where everything is masculine?
It just feels like the Wild West is on its way. That's the other thing, because, you just see little by little rights being taken away. So it's just, it's that phrase, like, we're not going back. So I like to always imagine, like, these women, and they probably did exist, in that time,
Well, certainly there was always a time when there were some women who had to shoulder up responsibilities that they weren't raised for, so yes.
In researching the nuclear family,
Sure.
found that certainly from the Middle Ages on, women were a vital part of the economics of every single family. And it included grandma, aunts, mothers, female children. All of them worked for success to take care of the family. If you look at Long Island during the Revolutionary War, occupied by the British, many of the men who were sympathizers with the war effort left for Connecticut, and the women were alone on farms on Long Island for the duration of the war, billeting British troops in many cases. So women have always stood up and taken care of their family.
Right. Again, like from my personal experience, my mom, she was working as a seamstress, and all of the women in my family did as well too. My mom was moved out to Suffolk County I guess she was probably about 14 or 15, and it was maybe just at the end of just before the war, just the beginning of the war. And she used to take the Long Island Railroad from Deer Park into the city to work as a seamstress. Right. And when she passed away, we were going through things, and we saw like a Long Island Railroad ticket, which was $5 for the month. the monthly pass. Yeah, right. So we live in a world where myth is rampant. Like we create a reality, or somebody tries to create a reality for us now, right? And we live within it, and it's not really just new. With it seems to be overwhelming now, but it was much more subtle, right? You know, and it was the
Yeah.
subtlety that made it so effective in the past and made it so, you know, when I'm looking at your work, you know, when you see all these games and all these candies and you think everything is great, you know, and it's pushed out there that, yes, everything is great, you know, and we shouldn't think about those other things. We should just consume the, you know, the myth and consume the products that the myth gives us.
Yeah, and as far as like the, what does it mean, the nudity, I mean, like, you know, when strippers and things like that, you know what I mean, like, anything that's just, you know, makes people uncomfortable, you know, that type of unnecessary, you know, pushing just without any purpose or meaning behind it, you know what I mean? Like, other than that, like, you know. But,
Anything? Anything?
I try to be very non-judgmental in my work.
I think
mean,
that she's got these things on here of being, you know, going to school for, what was that? Harvard Consulting Psychology, right? You have to be a listener. Right? You have to spend 90% of your time listening, right? What's that?
No, I mean.
No, I was trying to, I was trying to get her to continue the story, you know.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
no, I just.
So,
wanna make
you
sure
know,
that it's just the, you know, the other-
Is there anybody in the audience who would like to
I think
ask
it's beautiful.
or
Saying
contribute some thoughts?
Oh.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's okay.
no, I just wanna make
Yeah.
sure that.
Yeah, Rob.
I don't.
So there's a Kurt Vonnegut quote, like a husband, a wife, and 2 kids isn't a family, it's an extremely vulnerable survival unit. And that just kind of popped into my head when Barbara was talking. I think we have, you know, I think if you ask most people, they would say, women used to marry, right, you know, 100 years ago, let's say, they were marrying at 14 or 15 or 16, right? Like, that's, from what I understand, and what you're saying isn't really true, right? And that's like a 70 years ago type of thing. Like, why did that happen? And like, what in society changed that pushed us in that direction? And
I think in general, female children were very often married off around the time of puberty. You know, it made economic sense. It allowed her to explore her newfound power as a woman, and the fact that she did not have birth control, it was wise. But over time, that did change. So when we talk about someone marrying at 12 during the Middle Ages, you would not compare that to a young woman in 1918 or any of the 1900s. They were marrying older and older, if anything, because they were setting up family wealth, and they were learning skills and trades, and then they were finding their partners.
yeah. And why did that change in the post-war period?
Well, you know, there was a knee-jerk reaction, I think, after World War II. A lot of women waited for a long time to find someone. You know, the men were at war, women were marrying later, and their daughters, on the other hand, had a little bit more opportunity. And it was the Industrial Revolution was behind us. There were aids that made it possible to run a household without pulling in water. I mean, you turned on the faucet, the heat came on, you know, things were not as drastically difficult physically for women, and that opportunity to marry younger presented itself.
It's funny that you call it an opportunity, you know, I guess you could view it on both sides, right?
Well, as long as it's entered into with full consent.
Yeah, hi.
But then you had like, my family had farms, and they married to have a lot of children work on the farms. That had something to do with it also, didn't it?
Oh, definitely. You have 2 different ways of looking at things. You know, I have a friend who had a grandmother who in the 1800s had children one right after another, and it was considered kind of scandalous. They lived in Baltimore, they were part of society. And yet her maybe cousin who lived in agrarian society, it was considered wise. It was intelligent, it was another hand to help. You're right, the more industrial the situation, the wiser it is.
Yes,
I'm very touched by what you said about strong women.
Oh,
To hear a young man like you in an arts talk like that,
thank you.
I say, bravo. Could you share with us what happened in your life that brought you those values? What was it that contributed to this set of values that you have? And then could you tell me, what are the values in your opinion of a strong woman?
I mean, as far as like in like my life, my childhood, you know, they might not like my parents divorced over time, you know, they didn't get along, so I spent a lot of time at my grandparents' house on the weekend, and that's when I was painting. And, you know, however they may have been before I was born, but the way I saw it was that, you know, they were loving, you know, husband and wife, and I always felt like I got the demeanor from them, and seeing that, and just the kinds of people that they are, you know, I just grew up with that type of environment as well. And then a lot of times when I'm home, I'm always hiding out in my room, but I think deep down inside, because as a kid, when you grow up too, like I'll admit, like, you know, when you try to find yourself and you start to follow certain people, and then eventually find yourself become a leader. But I don't know, there's something always in me that always felt what's right for others. And also too, like growing up with more biblical, I'm not a religious person, but I've read, not to go into religion, but, you know, I've read the Bible, I've read things that I'm reading, and I'm seeing that there's, you know, I sort of like things that were wrong about that, with women considered property, slavery, genocide, things like that. So it was just things that I was always about, like, you know, treat others the way you want to be treated. But then over time, I think it got even stronger for me when I met my wife, and, you know, but it's also the stories about, I don't want to put her on the spot, but you know, hearing stories about sexual misconduct, sexual assault, and now these so-called alpha males on social media following, you know, it's hard to explain. It's just something that's been in me, and it's just like I've always, it just came out more and more and stronger as I got more of a voice. Like, I'm 39, so, but in my 20s is when I started to really open myself up to be more vocal about things. You know, so yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, I'm trying to, like, it's just like a feeling, it's just the way I am. But I obviously am not perfect, you know, obviously, you know, when you're growing up as a young boy and like, you know,
Well, please never change.
what?
Please.
Oh, no. You know, and it's like, I've always wanted to, like, start some movement of some kind, but I just don't know how to go about those things. Sometimes it's hard for me to articulate also my feelings. That's why I just translated my work. So, like, I'll, like, if you looked at some of my work here, and then if you read a script I wrote, you know, I find a story with it. And your second question was about
What are the values of a strong woman?
the values of a strong woman. I mean, it's just
Her.
them. It's just, you know what I mean? Yeah. I mean, it's just someone who is everything that's not what a lot of what everybody, else on the other side, is, you know. It's hard, like, if you have me sit down, and write this down, I can give it all to you. But it's just everything that's, like, my wife, like, it's just everything that's about her. She's strong, she's nurturing, she cares. She's very rare, because sometimes she gets a little disappointed by a lot of people, because it's like, nobody's like you. It's like, you gotta, I'm the one that's always like, you gotta go in not trusting anybody. But she's very independent, and, you know, she just takes matters in her own hands. She's, you know, just being, supporting, nurturing, and you know, powerful. It's hard for me to get the words out.
So why don't we, since we have two women here as well.
Yes,
Maybe that's an interesting question to ask the two of you.
Why don't you go first?
What was the question?
Well, reword.
Okay, so what are the characteristics of a strong woman?
Don't know.
Okay, valid.
I think most women are strong. I really don't think that there is a characteristic. I think just all of us that walk this earth, because life is hard. Life is hard. Being an artist is hard. Being a woman artist is extraordinarily hard. So I think every woman that I see and meet is strong.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go with that. I can certainly understand that, but I think if I had to ascribe attributes, I would say that kindness first. You know, women often have to balance their toughness against their nurturing, and many of the roles that they take on over time include even just something silly like cooking. You know, I'm married to a different husband this time, and every single day he says to me, "What's for dinner?" And I find that just amazing. In my life, I always lived with people who love to cook, and I didn't really realize how much of a burden that will be for the rest of our lives together. Do you know, it's very simple, but sometimes
You should check that out first.
it's everything. It's just, think about it. In many cases, women in relationships take on they work full-time, they take on domestic responsibilities, they're primary caretakers of their children. We can list many, many things that I admire in women, and
Good.
of course in men too,
Certainly.
but that would do it for me.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to respond to Joe for a second. When I was probably in my 20s, just like you, I had a similar, I don't know whether, you know, I guess with me, it was like, I called it male liberation. And it was the idea that I did not have to, as a man, play the stereotype of a macho guy. Look at me, I could have never been a macho guy to begin with. But, you know, not being big of stature, or, you know, or those kinds of things that were admired in a man. I always had felt that, you know, I guess I felt like I was, you know, insecure about my masculinity because of that. So then I realized, forget that. I don't have to play that role anymore, right? That's not the role I need to play. And that was what I called male liberation. I could just be me. I'm a guy, so I'm a male, and I could just be who I am, and I don't have to try to live up to somebody else's role of who I am supposed to be.
That's what I was thinking too, like, the reason I feel like that, like, even like what I was saying about the alpha males, like, you know, self-proclaimed ones, be like with society and how, like, things are getting harder for women and young girls with social media, and then the guys, the older guys, I feel like are becoming more insecure, and they don't want to really, I mean, some of them are just, but to really, like, you know, break free from being a follower, like, see, that's a problem now today. I feel like more and more people are starting to idolize others, where it's like, I don't idolize anybody. I just, do my thing. I have my own feelings if I lose friends from it or other people. That's the way it is. But like I said, all those feelings and emotions come through me, and that's what translates in my work. It really does come down to a personal thing as well. It's not just a love for the West, or whatever, any other subject that I'm painting. But yeah, it really comes down deep down for that. I'm sorry.
So we've come a long way from talking about the art. I guess art really is just as it should always be, is a jumping off point about talking about life, I don't, there are some people, and there was the art for art's sake movement, but I don't even think that really in itself was just about art. And, it always comes back to how we live, we make our art and it always comes back to that.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a moment about woman artists, because we're talking about strong woman. Being a woman artist, I think, is a very, very difficult position to be in. And I think there's a lot of limitations that we place on what women can paint and what they can be successful being an artist and what we can portray. So as a woman artist, if I paint beautiful things, if I paint children, if I paint flowers, I'm not a serious artist. And I think there's a lot of those limitations that have been placed on women through the years. And I think it's had a serious effect on what kind of work we see become successful from women. And I think that's a lot of times that's in a lot of my work, and that myth making, because what is art but making myths and making stories, and allowing those stories to come forward. So there's a lot of women out there making incredible work. You're not necessarily seeing, because we're only allowing certain kinds of work to rise to the top. So I think it's important to know, and you'll see a lot of work from women artists. A lot of them are based in violence, which is something I think is important to realize and think about. Contemporary artists, contemporary female artists, a lot of that work tends to be in a violent kind of vein. Or once I remember being on a panel and an artist said, it was about that male artists, they were making serious art. But women artists, not so serious. And I think if you look through history, and you can see we've only been allowed to be artists, in as large a sense as it is, for a very short period of time. Only a handful of artists could rise to the top before that. So anyway, it's to me something that I think is present in my art, because I felt like I've been held back in many ways by what I can and am allowed to say.
I would like to add something. I went to Stony Brook in the 1970s and late 70s, and graduated in 1981, and started as a medical illustrator because I was a biochemistry major, and then I switched to art. And I remember a very successful student saying there are two types of artists here in this class. He said there are housewives, and then there are artists.
Oh my gosh, I think I know who that is.
Yep, they completely divided the class by gender. And I think as a result, I started working as a sculptor, and I worked in bronze, and I worked with heavy metal, and I leveled the field by using hydraulics and other tools. And I'm happy to say, at the moment, I'm very comfortable with who I am, and if I want to create art using toys, I will.
All right.
Or, the imagery of a house made of tin, I feel comfortable with it. And it's a change that's happened in our lifetime with how women are perceived.
A certain amount of maturity, finally saying,
For me,
a
yes.
little bit of, whatever.
Yeah,
This
is what makes me happy.
If I want to use toys, I'm going to use toys.
Right.
Because
Or
I
candy.
felt if I'm going to use candy, I'm going to use candy. There is a certain permission at that point. You have to give yourself permission to do it. And I think certainly there wasn't that permission to do that early on.
So in a reversal for that, because Barbara and I were in school together, And then I went from there to Hunter College. And while I was at Hunter College, I was in a seminar, and my professor was a woman whose work was based on using construction equipment, right? Her father had a construction company, and she could use this kind of equipment, right? To make really, really earth-oriented physical works. I, on the other hand, was sewing paper together because I had the life of my mother's seamstress, right? And so I had spent all of that, and I was accused of not being tough enough. But then already I had that experience, so I didn't care, if I was tough or not anymore. But it was an interesting, it was almost a reversal of it, but, so we felt it too, guys who didn't, fulfill the roles that were expected of them. But it's interesting how, we were all expected to be pushed in a certain direction in our art, when we were young.
I certainly remember the kindness of a lot of the men when I was first working in sculpture. And most of the time they kind of ignored me, and eventually some became my lifelong friends. And so even then things were starting to change, and I did have that opportunity to do that. So we've been blessed in this century with the changes that have happened.
Very good. Very good. Anybody else would like to ask or contribute? Yes.
Thinking about, my own life, that, these myths were, I even think of them as prescriptions, they come from somewhere. They either come, from religion or, politics or commerce. They come from somewhere, and they're meant to tell a lesson or motivate someone or sell something. There's someone or an authority that starts it, it's a prescription, and it has a motive, and it's up to each of us to decide on our own, like you were saying, whether you agree with that or you don't. And each one of those has a repercussion, it has a consequence, it has a behavioral step that goes into motion from there. And, I think where we're in the space right now is you have to decide what's right for you and not prescribe to something that's outside of your realm or doesn't agree with who you are as a person or with your work, and decide write your own, I don't want to call it myth, but write your own story.
I had a,
About those things all the time. Thank you.
remind you,
Good.
because I did a piece, it's not here, very controversial piece, it's not a digital thing, about climate change and women's rights and stuff, and it's kind of disturbing picture, but I had like a kind of well-known artist tell me, I hope this ends your career.
There you go. That's a
And
good
blocked
one.
me on social media. But it's like, because it's like it's like what happened to that, like, because I was, I later in life I got into like starting to express my feelings with artwork and stuff. Before that I was just doing like landscape, which is still nice, but I get, that's what I was taught. But it's like what happened, because this is my this was actually like my second exhibit. All these years I never took my work anywhere else, and right when I just started to be more expressive with it, that didn't discourage me or nothing, but it's just like what happened to because I had a thing about some parts of the art world, I was not here, but like other places that are out there, where I had this, opinion about, and then I was thinking like, what happened to the controversy? What happened to the acceptance of, sending a strong message just because you don't like what's in it, what's like be disturbing. I don't know, it just brought up when, like you're saying, just make me think about it. But,
So that experience is one that most artists have, most people who persevere as artists are often confronted with, at some point, some real negativity towards their work, and you have to understand who you are and just go beyond that, because that's just one person. Right, and they have their own insecurities as well too, right? So there's all of that out there in the world. Any final thoughts?
I'm very grateful to be part of this panel.
Well, I'm
And to
so
be
glad you were
experiencing
here.
this and meeting all these great new people.
I'm
Thank you very much
I'm
for
so
the
glad.
opportunity.
I had kind of lost touch, and once or twice we had been in the same place over the last maybe 10 years. And even once I remember Bill was there, but then when I saw these works at the Action Museum, I said, oh, they are so full,
Thanks.
they're so full that, I really needed I needed to bring them out here. And that's one of the things that, I have the pleasure of doing as a curator, is putting together work, that I think is, important for people to see, but also has a way of having a conversation amongst the pieces, the different art that's in here. So, I mean, it's a lot of fun to be a curator. And I am grateful that I got to do that too. Anything else, Maria?
I'm also very grateful.
Well, we have gratitude here. This is
I'm
good.
thankful for everybody that came. Very, very thankful.
Oh, yeah, you guys are one of the biggest crowds. Yes.
I came here 2 nights ago. I was lucky that I was here by myself. The work is amazing. The work is really, really good. I was amazed.
Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.
Pictures, digital or film?
You're speaking to me?
Yes.
I shoot them with my cell phone, so they're digital. And do very little manipulation. A lot of lighting.
So you're setting the stage. They're all staged. They're all staged.
Oh, definitely. Very deliberately lit, and I spent a lot of time getting everything organized.
And they're very interesting in that, like, there's titles like what day is the Ironing Day? Tuesday?
I did a series of
Yeah.
women's jobs. There was a time period where, Monday you did laundry, Tuesday you ironed. We had tea towels in the house that showed all the different jobs. Wednesday you mended, Thursday, ladies, the sales would change. And so Thursday was market day,
Market
still
day.
today. Friday they cleaned.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday baked, and Sunday was the day that you rested by feeding a lot of people and attending church and getting your children all dressed up and everybody back and forth. So that's the day of rest.
That's pretty funny. That's pretty funny. Yeah. And then there's seasonal ones too that are out there too, which leads me to the point that she has some very interesting calendars that she's made of these monthly events, each one, like the Book of Hours, right? They were called the Book of Hours during the Middle Ages.
They're
Right?
fun when people flip, they call me, hey, oh, I like the picture for November, it's great.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Thank you all for being here, taking your time out to come. It was a lot of fun hearing you talk and getting the comments from the audience. Thank you so much. So we'll be back another time. Thank you.